Alex Russell is he's at Microsoft now, working on the Edge team. He is. I don't want to make you sound old. Yeah, he's a vet. I think he was at Chrome for 12 years. I feel like I remember going to a South by Southwest and you were like on a panel representing Dojo, like the JavaScript library was like a JavaScript library war panel thingy or whatever. He's been doing this a long time. From helping to maintain a JavaScript library, working on web standards, working in the ECMA group, working at different browsers, doing some consulting and stuff for nonprofit and government sites. So he's really seen this from every possible angle. And every time he writes something, I make sure to make a pot of coffee and sit down and read them. It's always well worth the time. But yeah, please welcome Alex.
Thanks, Tim. Yes, so there's a non-zero chance that thanks to Tim, not just thanks to Tim's, I think, kind introduction, that this talk could easily veer into the old man yells at cloud category of talks, and I'm going to try to avoid that by instead telling you today not about what's happening, but about why. Because, as Tim mentioned, I have done an eclectic set of things in my time working on the web. And I do those things primarily because I realized sort of pretty far into my time working on the web that I want the web to win. It's hard for me to say that I want something. So for me to acknowledge my own interest in the web winning is took work, but this is what I want. I want the web to win. And we have to define what the web is, so I'm going to offer the definition that the web is the currently linkable set of documents that you can get to by tapping on link A to B to C. That's the public web, those are the private webs, but that's what a web is. And the web that we have, that's just the web, not my web, that big the web is that bigger set of documents that are in public. And I will also offer that I think that the reason I want the web to win is that the web encodes a set of virtues. It has attributes that other software ecologies, certainly at the application layer, don't share. Or if they have pieces of them, they only have a few. They don't have them all. First, the web is safe. It's got a paranoid security model. We spend, at least on browsers, we spend an unreasonable amount of time, effort, energy, and money ensuring that clicking on any link is safe by default. You don't feel weird by tapping on the next link, which is one of the things that enables us to facilitate the extremely low friction to distributing software, including the freshest software you've ever had. Every link you click on is generally taking you to the latest version of everything, because you have no friction in publishing, which is incredible. That enables everyone to just tap on link to link to link to link, which hopefully creates value for users and the wider ecology of things they're linked to and from. The web is also interoperable. This is a unique property. Most other successful software ecosystems at the application and user layer don't have an interoperable system. What are the other ones you can think of? Desktop Java? Maybe? Everything else that has that interoperability layer is either downstream of the web or uses pieces of the web, because the web is the only ecology that has sprung up that has baked that interoperability into its bones, which allows it, in part, to be user-mediated, because you can pick which user agent you want to use. If Edge sucks for you, you can use Firefox to a first approximation, right? These are all choices that the user gets to make, which enable you to be part of a conversation around your interests that does not involve either the platform provider, necessarily, or the software provider of the service that you're using today. You can put yourself in the middle and install extensions, have different privacy policies. That marketplace can work. And because of the interoperability, user mediation is a real threat, which hopefully causes various parties as a part of this ecosystem to watch themselves. Another piece of this which I find foundational is that the web doesn't have gatekeepers. You don't have to wait for the web, I guess, to review your app before you can publish the next version. That's not how any of that works. You just put it on your web server. And as long as your web server is reachable and linkable right now, it is part of that public set of interconnected documents. And underpinning all of that are the standards that we have written, which make the intellectual property that sits at the bottom of this entire tall set of virtues possible. And that lends itself towards being open source friendly. We have multiple implementations today of open source browser engines. Those engines compete. That competition delivers huge value to end users and to developers when the competition is healthy, which is not all the time, and we'll talk about that. But I want to go further. I want to say that you, if you are in this room working on web performance or curious or working on the web, should probably also want the web to win. But what does it mean for some ecosystem or ecology to win or to lose? What is the actual definition of winning? I think it's relevance, but we can come up with more specific metrics than relevance. This is a mainframe. This is a Z series. I think this is a Z16. It's a very fancy piece of kit. I can't afford one personally. I couldn't afford to power one personally. But gosh darn, it's shiny. And this powers a huge fraction of today's commerce. Mainframes aren't gone. They're not dead. They're not in the past. This is a machine you can buy today. And they continue to be produced because they are fantastically valuable. But they are not relevant. We are not writing lots of new software for mainframes. Generational software platforms never really die. They go into remission. They go into remission in the same way that the mainframe went into remission. There are probably more mainframes in operation, actively processing transactions and making it possible for you to get your health records today than there were in 1970 or 80 or 90. It's still, to some strict definition, potentially a growth market. You could go have a career writing COBOL or Fortran or C or Java or anything else that runs on a mainframe, specifically for these kinds of devices, and that would be success under a certain definition. But it's not relevance. So if you'll allow me 27 or so slides to get through a quick digression into the web as we have had it in its most successful epoch, I'd like to explain how we got here a little bit, and maybe offer some causes of our current environment. First, there were the predicates. Windows, Mac, Linux, Unix, not Linux. These were all open operating systems. The APIs that you could build software on were open enough to everyone who could write software for those platforms. The web came up on top as a protocol layer on top of an open internet. Anyone who could plug in a web server and get an IANA-issued IP address could be putting a web server on port 80 or port 443 and suddenly be able to publish on the web. This was an open system. Traffic could route to you. It was open. You didn't have to get a developer key. You didn't have to sign up for a developer program, pay $99 a year, or whatever the other hurdles were to start to be part of this ecology. And all of this was underpinned by regulatory and legal environments that allowed competition between both browsers and operating systems and websites to flourish. Competition is a virtue that underpins all of this. It's a value. But in terms of the competition between platforms at the application layer, the web is kind of unique because it provided a cost-competitive channel for software distribution. What do I mean by that? Well, the cost of distributing the next website is the cost of publishing a link and then tapping on that link, right? Uploading something over FTP, putting it on your web server, boom, there it is. And web search engines made it possible in the early web ecology for those things to be found, starting with directories like the DMOZ directory that Yahoo eventually had, to real search engines like AltaVista, to all the ones that we've used today. And those further reduced the cost of distribution. You didn't have to know the name of the thing, or you could look up just like a part of the name, and then you could get a link to it. You didn't have to go to the directory and follow that particular set of link clicks to get to the next one. And we've added to that by creating shortcuts in your dock and on your home screen with PWAs. The next thing that I think is foundational to how the desktop web was won was the fact that you could have kind of the 20% of capabilities that unlocked 80% of use cases for a great many sets of things. Now, 80-20 capability is always situated. People talk about it like, I need these 20%. But if you're building a platform, it turns out you have to provide them all because it's kind of peanut butter. To facilitate most of the things, people are going to pick what seem to be random assortments of capabilities, and they're going to turn them into the value chain that enables their application, right? What is the difference between an email client, which mostly lays out text in boxes, and, I don't know, a video editor, whose UI is primarily laying out text in boxes? They both talk to the network. They both put some pixels on screen. You can click affordances in the UI. But there's a bunch of stuff under the covers that's kind of different. So just laying out text in boxes isn't enough. But the web has grown in a way that is a little bit uneven over time. We've suffered some very large periods of fixed capabilities where, because trailing edge browsers weren't moving fast enough, or because we were not able to exploit new capabilities at the same clip as the same sets of capabilities that were common in commodity operating systems and in popular hardware, it wasn't possible in some cases to try to bring certain classes of applications to the web. And these things are not generally what the press focuses on. The press is always going to be looking at what was just released in a high-margin, low-volume device by a prestigious single vendor. The action, though, the thing that makes software real for everyone in the world, is the stuff that happens well into the commoditization part of the story. And if we don't continue with our meta platform, the web, to continue to add the capabilities at the same clip as either proprietary or the commoditized line, then eventually we could suffer from a relevance gap. And that has happened a couple of times. We can think of a few examples. I won't belabor it. We can talk about them later. But if we think back to the early web, the 90s web had the basic capabilities that some use cases relied on, that 80-20 set, the 20% of stuff that got you 80% of the way. Now, for news, for instance, you did need some networking. You needed to be able to display some graphics. And it sure would be nice if you had fonts that sort of tried to recreate your very beautiful fixed layout in your 96-point column layout. But it's OK if you don't have all of it. You could suffer a lot of fidelity loss and still be able to support the essential capabilities that get you news. Email was a little bit more of a stretch. We needed most of the things that you could do, but a little bit more to really displace the full email clients at the time. But I don't think that we could say that we were really suffering for attempts and things that did a really great job. If you had an AOL mail client at the time, or Hotmail, or even Outlook Web Access, these systems gave you a great fraction of what you got with the full-fat native download thing, which basically forced you to become a systems administrator, to install software, to update it, to configure the endpoints on the servers, all that stuff. All that went away as soon as you had a web page that could do the same thing for you. And by having those 20% of the capabilities that were necessary for 80% of the features, it was possible for the web to start to challenge those use cases too. And by challenging the use case, you drew users in because the web's model was easier, better, safer, and faster. This culminates, of course, with high-end products like Gmail, or today, if you look at the new version of Outlook, Project Monarch, even the desktop version, which you go download as a binary, everything inside that red square is web. It's Outlook.com running inside of WebView 2. That's Teams as well. The web is now the essential ecosystem for desktop computing. Video conferencing had the exact same sort of journey. The original set of capabilities that got you news and email weren't enough, but as soon as some extra things were added around the side, we didn't have to fill in 100%. We got to 80%, and that was enough for video conferencing to start happening in anger, in earnest, and at scale on the web. And then when you start to add those things together, they turn into an opportunity landscape for folks who are trying to do something that's adjacent and almost possible. So what happens when I can do video conferencing, and then I can start to take input from a gamepad? The gamepad API was added to modern browsers, I want to say in 2012, right? But the game streaming revolution didn't happen until many years later, when all the rest of the pieces fell into place. And so now we've got GeForce Now, and Amazon's Luna, and Microsoft Game Pass. And all of these things are possible now because we had this set of capabilities that were latent. And as soon as the benefits of the web's distribution model, which is superior in friction and in cost and in interoperability to the other ones, as soon as that showed up, we were able to unlock a whole new set of use cases. We've tried that again much more recently with a project that I helped to co-lead called Project Fugu, which is a collaboration between Google and Microsoft and Intel and Samsung and others, to add a whole new class of capabilities, which is unlocking developer tools and Photoshop for the web and a whole set of other things. Because when you add the 80/20 capability, the web's underlying model of freshness, interoperability, and low friction turns into a business advantage, not just an end-user advantage. OK, third essential ingredient for the web to win. The win conditions are an open and interoperable substrate, the ability to have it feel good enough, it doesn't have to feel perfect, 80/20 capabilities. And when I say it has to feel good enough, what I mean is that you can't cross interaction classes necessarily. This is from Microsoft's documentation about advice to people who are making native apps on Windows about how to think about the different groups or types of interactions that you might be providing to your users. But you don't have to really think hard about this. All you really need to know is that when the web was able to get into the same range, into these interaction classes, it was possible for the web to start competing for these use cases. It didn't have to win all the time, but it had to be in the hunt. We always take a peak performance hit when we move to an open, interoperable, interpreted runtime that requires interoperability, which means that there has to be some extra code to sort of sort things out between different implementations. But the web got here because of Moore's law, in part. We ended up with a lot of CPUs that were constantly plugged in, so there was no dark silicon. We didn't have to worry about thermals quite as much as we do today. And we ended up with a really good run of the doubling of transistor density, turning into real delivered improvements in main thread execution, which is what the web depends on in order to give a good experience. And the same thing happened, at least in the US and other wealthy markets, on desktop with broadband. Broadband had a very similar trend line happening at the exact same time. We were all downstream of a bunch of things that were shifting out underneath us. We got faster computers, and many of our cohort got faster computers too, because wealthy folks had faster computers and money to spend. And about the time that cable overtook ADSL, we ended up with Ajax. You can see that in this chart too. But this whole situation occurred because the trends converged such that there was enough resource overhang to make the web's inefficiencies, if you will, tolerable, such that we could get into the same weight class as other kinds of applications, with that hit still being applied to our model, but providing a superior experience because we happen to be safer, faster, easier to get to, lower friction, interoperable, and multi-user. You could go to any computer, get a browser, and suddenly get access to your email. You didn't have to sit there and install and download a binary application. OK, today, I'm happy to report that more than 70% of the jobs to be done on desktop operating systems happen on the web. That's incredible. I think we can all agree. Certainly as someone who wants the web to win, and I hope for you, as someone who I hope you want the web to win too, I think that we should think of this as absolutely incredible. We could probably pack it up, right? Go home. But this is an Alex Russell talk. So we're going to have to come back to reality for just a moment. One thing I want you to walk away from this talk with is an understanding that platforms are competitions. When time and use cases move to the browser, they move to the browser from something. There's a lot of happy talk. There's a lot of kind of like California nice in a lot of technology conversations around platforms, where people who are really trying to extinguish your chances will tell you, oh, don't worry about it. Like, we can all go along, get along. Platforms are competitions, and you're winning or you're losing. And if you don't know which one you are, you're probably losing. And the web today is losing. What do I mean by that? Well, 75% of the devices that run browsers are smartphones. And that means that if the web were as successful on phones as it is on desktops, I'm guessing that all of our habits would be foundationally different when we go and tap on an icon on the home screen, right? I think we probably would have a different experience of which is the thing that causes us to go acquire software. How do we actually traverse our digital lives on our phones? I think a lot of people look at this chart, which is the percentage of mobile versus desktop browsing as reported by StatCounter. All the asterisks apply, just squint a little bit. And worldwide, and think, cool, the mobile web is larger than the desktop web. The mobile web must be a success. But this is what I see, because I'm weird. I do a different job than most people. And I see this line as deadweight loss. Deadweight loss is transaction value, the benefits to society of a transaction happening that didn't take place. Users who had to acquire applications to handle their digital computing through native app stores are trapped in non-interoperable software ecosystems using applications that they can't mediate. They can't plug in on something else underneath them. They can't change the privacy settings. We have to settle on native mobile ecosystems for the idea that someone getting rid of a persistent tracking identifier that they added as progress. Something that never occurred on the desktop, right? Like, we think of that as a sea change in our favor for privacy. This is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. We are in the bad place. And we are in the bad place in part because the web is not successful on mobile. So, there are lots of threats out there. There are lots of causes. And I can't convince you that you should work on all of them. I work on most of them, which is weird. There's a lot of stuff happening that causes the web to not be successful on mobile. There are many foundational aspects of the experience that try to take links from you and your browser, the thing that you choose as a user, and put them into some other native proprietary closed application, which provides value to the closed proprietary ecosystem that the gatekeeper for that ecosystem favors. There are in-app browsers. It's kind of incredible just how much damage Apple and Google have allowed Facebook to do to the web through in-app browsers. It's a real tragedy. I could give you an entire talk about it, about how insidious they are, how often they break capabilities, how much they destroy value to both users and to businesses on the web because of unsynchronized cookies and permission state and all the rest. But I'm not going to do that talk today. Search engine shenanigans, of course. Google lied with AMP. AMP was a lie. AMP was a lie. Google said up and down that AMP is not a search ranking change, but I don't know what you call it when something moves down the page if it's not a search ranking change. And so instead of causing everyone to make faster websites, they caused you to make a second website that they would then host to break all of your state URLs, logins, permissions, all that stuff. And instead of causing everyone to make faster websites, they caused everyone to make second websites. Okay. AI summaries are pushing links down, right? What is that? That's a ranking change. I would think of it as like revenue stealing with extra steps, but we can call it whatever you like. Apple, of course, is not, well, I assume this is a family-friendly kind of an audience. Let's leave it there. Apple, of course, can't go fully unmentioned. We have to talk about the ways in which they are using every legal maneuver in every book to undermine the ability for folks to express their choice in their browser in ways that might enhance the capabilities, which might give you as developers the power to challenge their app store. We can talk about WebKit and Safari quality, and Mozilla basically deciding that it didn't want to fight for mobile web. That's a real threat. Apple, of course, in addition to not delivering features on a regular basis, frequently breaks them. So this is a challenge that developers have. And all I can tell you is that if you care about those challenges, the most impactful and important thing that you can do as an individual is to go get signed up and join OWA. They are the real deal. It's a bunch of web developers who have gotten together to go challenge all of those gatekeepers, the folks who are keeping the mobile web from ever becoming a real boy. And they are doing the God's honest work to make it a real thing. And they have been wickedly successful on the back of the hope and help of folks like you. So please join them. So those are the first two actionable buckets, right? Capabilities and distribution methods. Which brings us to us. The web has to kind of feel good. If we're going to get back to a place where the win conditions for the web are met on mobile, we need to get to a place where we have the APIs that are necessary and that we have enough progress in CPUs and networks met with content that is compatible with those CPUs and networks, such that we get things back into the same interaction class as we had with native. Right? This is a race. We're fighting a race, and I just can't say enough good things about the work that Annie Sullivan and her team have done to make it possible for us to start to push back a little bit on some of the nonsense that we've had in our ecosystem. And we can talk about that. For my sins, I spend a good chunk of my day working with folks around Microsoft on something we've called Project Sidecar, which is a little internal consulting effort, and we go around and we say, hey, what hurts? Because we want to learn about which APIs we should add to the web platform, and they tell us it's performance. So we go do performance work with them. And a lot of things hurt. OK, so this is all to say that I do a very weird job. And I don't want to talk to you about my job, but I kind of have to because we've talked about like kind of an eclectic set of things that I've worked on over my career. Because I'm nominally a product manager, which doesn't make sense to me, at least. And this sits uncomfortably because what I think I do is platform strategy, boiled down to a set of actionable things that we need to do. I was in the room in 2007 when Steve Jobs got on stage and promised us all that making web apps was going to be the future of mobile. And I was working to make web apps in 2009 when that dream died after the App Store introduced both apps and then push notifications, and the web didn't get them. It's been a long road. We have all been promised a lot, and we've been under-delivered on mobile. And we have a lot of things working against us now. It has been going on 15 plus years of users becoming habituated to getting their software out of native app stores, things that have a coercive relationship to application development and software deployment. Users have become habituated to looking for their applications inside of these things. So what is necessary to fight back? Well, we're going to need a distribution platform that puts something under your thumb. You got to be able to be part of the tap and swipe ecosystem, so PWAs. We're going to need our content to become fast enough. So we should get things out of frameworks and put them into the platform, so web components and all that kind of stuff. And we're definitely going to need new capabilities that we didn't have before to access the new suite of sensors and tools that are part of every mobile device today. So that created something called Project Fizz and its follow-on, Project Fugu, to add those capabilities to the web platform. And so if we attack all of those things, if we get there, is it possible for us to win? So maybe. But we can understand very clearly today that the data that, again, Annie was the progenitor of, that caused me 5 years ago, almost to the day, to give a talk at Frontiers in 2019 that raised the alarm to say, not only were the things that I had been talking about for years prior about how we were on the wrong trend line because we had been working on PWAs and working closely with partner teams to see whether or not the applications that they built could compete with their native equivalents. And the answer was, if they built them right, with the tip of what the web platform could do in 2015, 2016, 2017, yeah, we could do it. We could actually get there. We could build competitive, compelling experiences. But that's not what teams were bringing to us. They were bringing experiences to us that were based on fantasies about Moore's law continuing and CPU overhang continuing to accelerate away from the desktop era. Those are the old wives' tales that sustain and support the ecology of NPM and React and all the rest today. The idea that we were going to have infinite and abundant CPU, that networks were going to get and continue to stay faster or not be intermittent. All of those things stopped being true when the big story about computing in the last decade really took over, which is that phones got dramatically cheaper. On a cost-adjusted basis, most phones today are significantly less expensive than the first iPhones were. And that means that we have opened up computing to whole generations of folks who live outside of the wealthy Western web, in which the web was initially started and started to flourish, and have created an ecology that is not adapting to their situations. You can see it from space now. Time spent is, this is just in the US, time spent on the web is low and fixed. Time spent on mobile phones continues to go up. This is playing out worldwide. This is not, specific to the US. Mobile phones are not just a part of everyone's life. They are the most personal device. They are used the most often. They are the thing that we talk about addiction to, right? You can read any story in any newspaper about this. This is a place where the web, if it were thriving, would be contending for share of time spent with native. On desktop, I can tell you, we are. That 70% of jobs to be done is not people going to their bank, doing one thing and checking out. It's everything. It's watching YouTube. It's socializing with their friends. It's checking in on their cats over their remote video cameras, whatever it is. All of that stuff on the web, checking their email. It's all happening on the web. On your phone, it's probably not happening in a browser or in something that is supported by your choice of browser. This is what mainframing looks like. This is what getting cast in amber looks like. This is losing, and I want to win. The situation, of course, is significantly worse in the most populous growth markets on the planet because they didn't start the mobile revolution with a healthy local web. The web was not a fixture in most people's lives. Most people's, on the planet's, first computers were their phones. And so if the default way that you get to information is through those App Store-mediated ecosystems, then you end up with more App Store-mediated ecosystem outcomes. And that has turned into both a winner-take-all dynamic within those app stores, where most publishers can't really survive because of both the tax rates of the gatekeepers, but also the fact that app stores are terrible search engines. And so it's hard to look at this and go, okay, that's where we're going to get our recovery from. So every year, and for many years now, I've been publishing these series of data to try to give me some hope, right? At some point, I hope it will be the case that at the bottom tier of this chart, for phones that cost $150 and $300 in the bottom two tranches, we will get to a place where we are not creating a larger gap in total CPU performance every year than we are taking away at the high end, that the high end is accelerating way at. That year has not come yet. Good news, as predicted. 2024 will probably be another year in which the low-end process node will shrink once again. Last year and the year before, it went down from 23 nanometers down to 17, 18, to 14. We're probably going to hit 11 at the cheapest side now. Many of the designs still suck. There's still no cache in these things. You've probably been hearing me bang on about how the best trade-off in CPU design for mobile phones for the last-ish decade has been to trade cores for cache. That trade is starting to happen at the high end, and we can start to see it playing out over the next couple of years. And the low end will eventually get the benefits of that. We're not quite there yet, but there is a hope. There is a hope that we will start to get at the bottom end. Both more users starting to buy their second phones, which will cause them to spend more, because once the phone is valuable to you, you want a better version of it. In your first phone, it's incredible expense with uncertain outcomes. So you don't necessarily buy the thing you could if you saved up before. You buy the thing that you can't afford right now. So these influences are going to start to converge, and we will start to see better performance of phones at the low end. We're not there yet. It's coming. I mentioned earlier that web developers over the last decade have been in thrall to a series of fairy tales. This is George Akerlof. His most famous paper is called The Market for Lemons. And in his paper, he describes why it is that in many markets, it's possible for there to be relatively successful vendors who sell goods and services which are significantly overpriced relative to what experts would appraise them at. This is nominally, in his terminology, the market for lemons. Why are there markets for lemons? One answer, of course, is that the efficient market hypothesis is nonsense, because it is. But this is a way of thinking about specific instances of that nonsense. He says there are many markets in which buyers use some market statistic to judge the quality of prospective purchases. In this case, there is an incentive for sellers to market poor quality merchandise, since the returns for good quality accrue mainly to the entire group whose statistic is affected, rather than the individual seller. It is profitable if you have more information than your buyers, potentially to sell nonsense, in part because they don't know any better. One of the beautiful things about Core Web Vitals is that it is finally allowing us to price some of the nonsense. And it is time, I think, that we call this stuff nonsense. 2 years ago, when I was invited to speak, I showed you how Benefits Cal, the entryway to California's public benefits services, performed on a low-end device, and what I thought of at the time as the P75 network. The good news is that there has been some improvement in those networks, if not exactly those devices, at the low end. That is real progress. It's no wonder, of course, that what looks bad in the lab looks terrible in your hand. There is, of course, a hysteresis here as well. And interestingly, some of these metrics that we have in Chromium misaccount for the multi-splash screen strategy that Benefits Cal has deployed. By the third or fourth splash screen, our heuristics kind of give up. There's some work to do. It's not just California, though. These are American states, by the way. We have a very weird federalist thing going on. We could have an entire conversation about it in the time that it'll take for these web pages to load. Yeah. Cool, assistive technology, great. The great state of New Jersey takes 25 seconds, more or less, to give people information about public assistance. The folks coming to these websites are not rich, they're not wealthy, they need help, and they're not getting it. Core Web Vitals is a tool for disciplining the behavior of commercial entities, people who care about whether or not they're going to lose money. Unfortunately, monopsonies aren't affected by market incentives. Now, you may think, okay, that's terrible, but on second load. How much time do I have? This is a surprise. This is incredible, isn't it? Right? It's almost synchronized. How does that happen? Well, so this is the first load. And if you saw some of the talks earlier today, you might recognize, you don't have to be a web page test trace expert to understand this. Yellow is JavaScript. Purple in the upper chart is JavaScript running. Yellow on the bottom is JavaScript running. That's first load. And that's second load. That 9% of websites that aren't necessarily sending correct caching headers or gzipping their content, they aren't all in the commercial sector. Some of them are critical services that people are depending on to get access and get help. The Massachusetts Department of Health and Human Services deployed an approach that I thought was particularly unique. This is a 9 megabit connection configuration, so the 9.5 megabytes of JavaScript that it's sending down the wire, uncompressed, should load significantly faster than 30 seconds, right? Like you would think that. But they rate limit the outbound to 750 kilobytes per second. This is a pastiche of the things that are in all of these bundles, because I studied them all. I've read them. There's, of course, a React or an Angular or a Vue, and some libraries which are, I think, in the English amalgamation of these words next to each other, I have to put quotes around state management, because they don't actually manage any state, because managing state would require synchronizing something with the server or having a vector clock. They don't do that. They propagate some state from a snapshot. It's very weird. They have a bunch of routing metadata, usually, dozens, sometimes hundreds of kilobytes. They have inline translations. This is a fun one. Multiple of these sites included, for accessibility, of course, the contents of all of the strings for the entire site in multiple languages in the initial bundle, in the critical path. A copy of core.js, because you can't get by without one. And Lodash as belt and suspenders. A wee bit of underscore. I don't think it's possible to build one of these sites without the node buffer class for the client side. I just don't think it's possible. Several of them had user-land implementations of elliptic curve cryptography, even though web crypto is available on all modern browsers. Polyfills galore, IE polyfills, just, again, for safety. Yeah, you knew it was coming. You knew it was coming. There's some OAuth stuff, probably a whole widget. It might include a framework of its own. So when I say React and or Angular / Vue, who knows who's bringing what to the party, right? Like, you can't just show up empty-handed. There's definitely going to be a third-party chat widget in there someplace. It might be in the main bundle. It might be delayed loaded later, but it's definitely going to slow down that initial page load. Some of them have had video conferencing tools in them. Amazon Chime is particularly popular. Charting libraries on the homepage of sites that don't have charts. CSS and JS. Again, family-friendly show. We're not going to talk about CSS and JS. Inline base64 SVGs and images are a dime a dozen, maybe $1, because they are so expensive for the user. Rich text editors on sites that don't have rich text editing anywhere on the initial page. This was surprising. Multiple implementations of XML and HTML parsing. Cool, I guess. Big int, because I guess IE8 didn't have it. I've seen a full MIME type registry. That is to say, the mapping of every single file name to every MIME type. And a rainbow table, including some terrible swear words that I could not reproduce here, just in case they might be part of a password, and a full transpiled copy of userland zlib. OK. I don't want this to be the full Alex Russell talk. I want to let you know that failure is not an inevitability. It is possible to build services on the web today using the tools that we have meticulously poured into the platform to try to make sites lighter and faster in order for them to compete with their native counterparts in ways that actually succeed. The UK government is famous for this. They do such an incredible job. I'm so grateful to them every day for what they've been able to deliver consistently across a whole host of services by simply saying, no, you don't get to bring frameworks. You must do progressive enhancement. So I think it's time that we call a spade, or in this case, a lemon a lemon. Like certain cars of certain eras, the frameworks that are being sold to our developer friends, they sure look good on the sidewalk. They have big specs, 3-liter V8. But as soon as you start to drive them, you realize you put your foot down and things don't go fast. You can't really steer them at speed, right? They've just got terrible stuff. And sometimes the internal combustion doesn't stay internal. They do frequently blow up on you, and it's not just for a lack of maintenance. These are lemons. And we need to name them. React, yeah. Redux, why? NPM is actually the root of a good chunk of this. We can talk about that later. And our CSS and JS. These are lemons. They do not work. They are excuses that we have made to each other and things that we are making excuses for, even though they are costing the organizations and people that we care about and the ecosystem that we all depend on huge amounts. They aren't working. I came across this from a blog post I read the other day, and I just couldn't not include it here. Nikhil Suresh writes that every little bit of uncaring makes the world a little bit worse. And once you're at a certain level of personal security, you have to own that. This is, I think, urgent for us in a world where the web is not winning yet. It is important that we and our colleagues decide that we want the web to win and that we start to do the things that are necessary to cause that win to happen. This is not from the HTTP archive. This is on their published data set. This is from the data behind it. I'm calling this the front-end sadness index, which is to say, if you had a site built on one of these stacks, on the bottom, you've kind of got the Core Web Vitals pass rate, right? And of course, there's a lot going on here. Not every site is like just one thing. There's a whole lot of stuff happening. But you know, the HTTP archive is a very large and vast corpus. Law of large numbers might apply. And on the top is the degradation that these folks experienced by moving from FID to INP over the last year. The fraction of sites in their cohort that were sadder this year than last. I mean, if we pull that down to the modern frameworks that are getting sold to many of our friends, what we see is that the folks who started saddest, the stuff on the right, got even sadder. Because again, all of this stuff is supported by fairy tales. CPUs don't get infinitely faster. Phones got cheaper, which is to say the same phone dropped in price and sold more units every successive year for the last decade. We didn't get what you and I got, which is to say we spent the same $800 and got a faster phone. That's not what happened. In order for the $1,000 iPhone, which emerged in 2016 or something, to balance out, to continue to be at $320, $330 as the average selling price in a stable way, you had to sell $500 phones, and that's exactly what happened. The ecosystem has gotten more unequal. That inequality is now something that we are baking into the cake. And the folks who are buying into the fairy tales of the desktop overhang are helping to drive that inequality home. I did a bad thing. I recreated a data set that I had built by hand a few years ago when the Chrome team was looking at investing into Next.js. Terrible idea, by the way. And I went through their entire showcase site and ran the FID numbers. Oh, sorry, the Core Vitals numbers. And the column on the right is the number of days over the last, or the number of Core Vitals metrics that had consistently passed over the last 90 days for mobile. We can see from the sites that these frameworks are holding up as the avatars of their own success, that they are failing all of us. They're in the way. I'd like to help you understand these as the platypus. This is effectively an amalgamation of technologies, or maybe it's the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, right? Like an internal combustion engine is very complicated, and an electric car is much simpler, but still quite complicated. And a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle is the unholy amalgamation of all of that complexity in one place, and it's definitely going to blow up on you, right? In terms of miles driven before it fails. That's what we're looking at here with many of these tool chains. Almost every website does not need to have the range anxiety of supporting IE9. Yet the tools that we're being told, and that all of our juniors are coming up being told that they have to adopt, are things that are designed for the constraints of IE9, or 10, or 11. You know who doesn't support IE11? Microsoft. You cannot get us to support IE11. We won't do it. You can't buy it from us. You want to use Monarch or Outlook on the web? No, thank you. We don't want your money. Why are these things baked into the assumptions of all of the tools that we're using? The opposite of engineering is bullshit. We are awash in our front-end discourse today in huge piles of bullshit. It is this room's responsibility, if it wants the web to win, to call bullshit. Not by fighting, but with evidence, and with tools and tactics that push back on it in a way that put the user first and that give us hope by creating space for better tools to win. The bullshit is not inevitable. I would like to leave you, though, with a couple of quick flowcharts for your conversations with folks that you may be talking to. Many of the conversations that I have begin here. And so this is my question. Do you support IE9? Many folks don't seem to understand this, but you generally don't need a synthetic event system or a hard-coded list of HTML elements unless you're supporting IE9. You could use Preact instead. And so, of course, these folks don't support IE9, so the answer is no. This is it. This is the whole flowchart. Now, managers come back, and we go through the same dance, and they don't support IE9, of course. And then they ask, OK, but meta frameworks and GitHub stars and my ability to hire for this, and boot camps, and what about React Native? And I think it is our job to point out that the job is to deliver good experiences for users. That's it. That's the whole way that we compete, by delivering good experiences to users. All of that stuff about like Moore's law and CPU overhang and networks getting faster, all of that is about getting into the same interaction class, delivering good experiences. And the things that allow us to deliver good experiences are the things that allow us to compete. And the things that allow us to continue to be web developers, as opposed to, something else. So we are at the final end of the bezel. We have come to the place where we can call a spade and predict its collapse. It's not going to continue. Something better will replace it. We can be rid of React and be rid of Angular soon enough. I don't know what that thing is going to be. It's probably going to be a return to some server-side HTML, something like Astro or Eleventy, with a little bit of islands here and there, or maybe some old-school PHP. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what it's going to be, but it's not going to be this. We don't have to live in intellectual dishonesty anymore. I don't mean to imply that we are being intellectually dishonest with the Web Almanac. I don't. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, we need to reckon with the fact that the right way to present this data is to suggest that we're a very long way from getting to 100% good. Core vitals have been incredible. They are the first thing that browsers have done to finally push back on the nonsense, and it is working. It is a sea change. We are starting to see so many of you here being motivated by clients who have come to you with questions, urgent questions about how they're going to improve their own site performance. That is a responsibility that browsers have long dodged and have started to take on. And again, I cannot thank Annie and her colleagues enough for making that sea change, making that happen and making it possible. There is much more for us to do from the browser side, and I believe it's urgent for us to do it. And before we go, I know I'm over time, I just want to leave us with a collective question. What happens if we get it right? Like, how much better would it be if our phones didn't force us to go download things from app stores? How much better would it be if switching your browser on your device allowed you to have a meaningful choice about how most of the stuff that you used every day got better or worse? If you were able to decide that when you wanted to put something out on the web as a PWA, there would be places where it could be discovered at a top-level way, where it wouldn't be buried or sort of a weird oddball thing to do. If the capabilities that you wanted to provide applications were things that were more consensual, right? The idea that we have to settle for what Apple and Google think of as being reasonable proxies for privacy today, which are nonsense, of course, don't have to be the way that this works. We don't have to capitulate to Google and Apple facilitating Facebook's destruction of browser choice either. All of this is something that we can repair. We can get to a place where your choice of browser can matter, and that using competition, we can get back to a place that we had in the late 90s and early 2000s, where we could put things on that were awesome on the web, and those could be most things for most users. I think that's possible. I think that that better future, it's cheaper for the organizations we work for, that's better for the users that we want to serve, that's more privacy respecting, and generally faster and safer, is something that we can all aspire to. And this room has a big part to play, because performance is part of that win condition. And the work you do is urgent. The work you do is vital, because the web needs you. We have to put users first, we have to stand for the truth, and we have to fight bullshit with data. So thank you for doing it.